At the start of this season, there were various changes to mage items and how they work in order to push certain strategies and kind of make some items less overwhelming. That was successful to some degree, and we're seeing some different starts from before, and new starts come up all the time basically. Today I want to look into some of these starts and specifically talk about a very new start that just very recently came up and is only played on a few guards, and that's a Rod of Tahuti rush. Now, by rush, I don't mean you immediately rush it when you start the game, but what is actually being played is a Mage's Blessing start and the tier 1 of Rod of Tahuti. Then you finish your boots and then you go into Rod of Tahuti. The boots here are sometimes pen boots, sometimes CDR boots. We'll talk about that in a bit. For Zeus, this strategy isn't entirely new, by the way. It was already played way back last year before many changes by, for example, Pretty Prime and Yaman, though it's hard to tell from the builds looking at them now if Rod of Tahuti was actually rushed here or simply traded out in some of the builds then. What's also worth noting, what's also interesting, is that we primarily see this played by two different mid laners at the moment, at least in the SPL so far, and that is Hurrywind and Panda Cat. I know that Veneno has been playing it on another guard, on Morrigan in Ranked, and we'll get into all those choices. But first, let's look at the item options that are generally available at the start of the game that you usually utilize as your first core item after or sometimes even partially before boots. So these items are sometimes built with Mage's Blessing, sometimes without, and typically with pen boots or CDR boots. The first item here will be Rod of Tahuti, which we'll look into more later. Price here is 3,000 gold, which meant in the past that it's an item you're not going to build early on. It's just too expensive to do that. The power is 150 right off the bat, and you get 30 MP5. You also get approximately 50-ish extra power when the target is below 50% health, including Mage's Blessing and including boots. The next option here is more for lifesteal oriented mages or AA mages as well. That's Bancroft's Talent for 2,500 gold with 100 power right off the bat, 150 mana and 15% lifesteal, but going up to 200 power and 20% lifesteal if you fall below 25% of your HP. Then we have the classic Book of Thoth for 2,650 gold with 80 starting power, 15 MP5, 250 mana, but at max stacks this item will have 1000 mana and therefore 170 power through the passive. The next item is Divine Ruin, 2,300 gold, 80 power, 15 flat penetration and 40% anti-heal. This one is obviously very popular at the moment as well because it just is very easy to fit into the build with that price and very effective overall. Quite a frequent first item that we see right now. Then there's Soul Reaver, 2,750 gold, 130 power, 300 mana, and additionally, against low health targets, you get 2% extra damage. If a target has well beyond 2,000 health, then the damage also increases to more, but that's not what we're primarily going to look at here. Then we have Spear of the Magus, 2,450 gold, 65 power, and 10 flat penetration. However, up to 50 extra penetration or protection reduction rather from stacks if you hit an enemy often enough. And last but not least, for good measure, I also put in Chronos Pendant, 2,800 gold, 90 power right off the bat, 20 MP5 and 20% cooldown reduction. It gets additional cooldown reduction from the passive as well. In terms of power, but the price is definitely on the lower end here though. Now we have some values that we can work with. The target here will be around 1,100 to 1,300 health around level 10, which is when you finish Rod of Tahuti, and which is when the other items will be finished as well. You can have a little more, a little less. I opted for 1,200 health here. This is only really important for Soul Reaver anyways. The magical protection of the target is going to be 39 at level 10. That's pretty much all characters anyways. We're going to use two abilities here to get a good picture of how much damage output this can result in under different circumstances. One is going to be Zeus 3 with the full stacks, so with 3 stacks, meaning it has 324 base damage and 60% scaling. The other ability is Morrigan's 2, when it procs both times for 320 base damage and to 80% scaling. Now before we get into the numbers, just a casual reminder, please remember to click the like button if you enjoy the video. It helps me out a lot, and lately a lot of people have not been doing it, so the videos get a lot less traction and get less seen by people. So yeah, would really help me out. Also, I dropped some codes in the description down below. If you haven't checked that yet, you might want to see if you can grab something. And now let's look at the results here. Our first staple, so to speak, is going to be Rod of Tahuti, which comes in at 298 damage. That is almost as much as the base damages after mitigation, so that's a pretty good start. This is without any passives applied, and we'll get to that a little bit later. With Bancroft Talon, we have 276 damage, and with Book of Thoth, we have 267 damage. So you can see they're both a fair bit lower than Rod of Tahuti. Still do a lot, of course, but just not quite as high in damage output, but also a little bit cheaper, of course. However, an item that does give us more damage output right off the bat is Divine Ruin. The 15 penetration really make a difference here for the base damage of this ability, which doesn't have all too much scaling, and therefore we end up with 300 damage here. With Soul Reaver, we have 289 damage. With Spear of the Magus, we have 281 damage without stacks. And with Chronos Pendant, we have the lowest damage here of 271. Or 272 rather, if you round up. So we can see that all of these values are relatively close overall. There's like a 30 damage difference between them. But we can also see that Rod of Tahuti is very much towards the top end here. And of course, the reason for building Rod of Tahuti with Zeus is also to utilize the passive, which is especially true for the 3. So we should look at that as well. And if we have the passive here, then our damage will increase quite significantly. We have a damage of 322 here with the extra 56 power you have from Mage's Blessing and Boots and Rod of Tahuti through the passive combined. With Bancroft Talon at maximum stacks, on the other hand, we'd get 319 damage. This is actually a fair bit lower in terms of what you will output most of the time, because there are not many situations where you're super low and using your full detonate, but rather there are a lot of situations where you will use your detonate on a super low target. If you can get it off that way, it's obviously nice, but Rod of Tahuti is often gonna be the higher damage output here. Book of Thoth, fully stacked, goes up to 306 damage, so it's a fair bit behind Zeus actually. With Divine Rune, our damage stays exactly the same with 300. With the Soul Reaver, we go up to 306 damage, including the passive in itself. So we have that little bit of extra damage against a 1200 health target, meaning if the target had more health, then the damage here could also increase more. With Spear of the Magus, we actually get the highest value of 363 damage. That is with full penetration applied. We only need 3 stacks at this point of the game to get through the enemy magical protection though, unless they're building more. So against squishies, this will still be the higher damaging choice, because usually you will have 3 stacks of Spear of the Magus by the time that you have 3 stacks applied for the detonate. With Chronos Pendant, the damage stays the same. Now what we can see here is that when it comes to really blowing up targets with your detonate, especially when they're low health, Rod of Tahuti is a good choice, but Spear of the Magus still seems to be a better choice. The question really is in this case if that still holds true with all the damage that you deal beforehand while applying the stacks. Considering it's just 40 defense at that point, it shouldn't be all too hard in my opinion to get more benefit out of the Spear of the Magus, but it's really situational at the end of the day. Additionally, another benefit of Rod of Tahuti is that it has MP5, meaning it makes it a lot easier to stay in lane longer, which of course is a big bonus as well. And the front-loaded power should actually also help a little bit with clearing as far as I'm aware. But now let's look at the Morrigan's 2 for comparison's sake, because that has a little bit more scaling. Here we can see that the damage with Rod is 316, and in this case we'll just open up the passive part right away and see that the damage here is 348 when the target's low. With Bancroft's Talon, we have a similar picture as before, going from 287 to 345 damage. Again, also with Morrigan, you will probably not utilize Banecrafts to its fullest compared to a boxing mage, so I wouldn't really recommend it most of the time, even though it has a lot of power for that price. The Book of Thoth damage also lags behind, staying at 328 max, and Divine Ruin is at 309. Still not a bad choice at all here. If you need anti-heal, it doesn't take away much damage in most circumstances, but it's also not the highest damaging choice in most situations. Then we have Soul Reaver with 305 damage and 322 damage. And again, we have Spear of the Magus with 288 damage, but up to 372 damage. The problem for Morrigan is that she doesn't have enough ways to effectively apply it. She would make a lot more use of an item like Spear of Desolation, which is what you typically build in a build next if you build Rod of Tahuti. So really, it's probably not for her. And then we have Chronos Pendant, which is just 282 damage. As there are some not so insignificant price differences between these items, I also wanted to have a quick look at the gold efficiency, how much damage you really get for your gold. For Rod of Tahuti, that's 0.1163, whereas with Bancroft's Talon, when it's fully stacked, we get 0.1381. Even the unstacked Bancroft's Talon gets a little bit more gold efficiency in terms of damage. And another item that has an even better standard here is Divine Ruin with 0.1346. So if you want the most damage for your gold, Divine Ruin is definitely the way to go, meaning that in games where there's benefit in Divine Ruin, you should probably opt into it over pretty much anything else at the start. And the current mid laners that are utilizing it a lot are doing things right by doing that. Spear of the Magus can outrank this efficiency with 0.1518 at max stacks, but that has to be stacked first. So what we can see here is that in terms of gold efficiency, even though Rod of Tahuti can do a lot of damage, it's not necessarily the best bang for your buck. But that's kind of okay because it is utilized in these niche situations where you know that with Zeus, you're going to use the detonate when the target is already relatively low. And with Morrigan, you will often use your entire kit when the target is low after having been transformed into another guard beforehand and not utilizing your own kit at all. And by that time, you're just cleaning up, basically. As for builds, with both guards, I would start with Mage's Blessing. For Morrigan, it's primarily the CDR that's really good for her. For Zeus, it's a little bit more about the fact that she's also very mana hungry. Then you want to finish off your boots. I would go CDR boots on Morrigan because she just benefits so much from CDR. Whereas on Zeus, you're a bit more flexible. You can go for the heavy pen, especially if you're going into Divine Ruin later. Or you can go into CDR and just get your penetration through Spear of the Magus. And then in either scenario, you'll be building your Rod of Tahuti. And afterwards, if you're not building Divine Ruin, you would be building Spear of Desolation with Morrigan because of the golem reduction and the penetration that she really needs at that point. Meanwhile, with Zeus, you'd probably be building Spear of the Magus. I hope this clarifies things a little bit about the start and gives you a better idea of how effective it is and when to use it. I would generally not recommend necessarily spamming it with most mages because often Divine Ruin is just a better choice. Often you can utilize Bancroft in some way, and often just stacking Book of Thoth with more options for power later is simply better. And Rod of Tahuti is an item that doesn't run away. You can still build in late game, but there is definitely merit to building it early now and actually rushing it, which was very, very frowned upon at one point in the past when the item worked differently and there was just more effective, cheaper items at any point. There are other guards that could potentially utilize the start as well, like for example Nuwa, but I'll leave it to you to figure out which ones you really want to use it with. And with that, thank you guys very much for watching. I hope to see you all for the next one tomorrow. If you're new to the channel, feel free to sub button and maybe the bell. It really helps me out. DukeSloth, out.